Now we have our youth perspective, and Tash has stepped in at the last minute, and so grateful as our last youth representative wasn't able to make it. So it's brilliant, and thank you so much. So over to you, Natasha.
Hey, hi everyone. I just want to check if you can hear me first. Yeah?
Yeah, that's perfect.
So, hi, I'm here to provide something of a youth perspective on how we view climate change and how we act on it. The first most obvious difference is that we've been raised within the climate change global warming narrative. So we haven't had that period of ignorance before learning of the implications of rising atmospheric CO2. Rather, we've grown up alongside the climate change narrative. It's within our imagined future, and we know that the adults who came before us have failed to prevent the damage we're seeing to the Earth system. We also know that some of them even knew the risks of continuing to exploit fossil fuels and yet chose to ignore them. So being a first generation climate change youth, whatever you want to call us, has created a confusing sort of disparity between the knowledge of the threat of climate change and the limited response we see around us in schools, on all scales, councils, government, internationally. For some of us, this disparity has been a driving force in the distrust in the systems which have supported business as usual and upheld the status quo. I think you can see this in many young activists. And for others, the knowledge response gap has caused a sort of mirroring of the complacent behaviours and inactions of the elders as they've grown up. For those of us who have engaged, there's a significant emotional challenge attached to the task of action, because obviously it shouldn't be up to young people to be whistleblowers and bear the weight of the future of the world on our shoulders, and yet the pressing time limits required to stay below critical thresholds is compelling younger and younger people to make noise. The challenge of this is amplified for young people surrounded by adults who may, for example, half-heartedly support green ideas, yet refuse to examine their fossil fuel use, how they vote, their meat consumption, etc. Moving on, the second difference is also an advantage for us in that we're the first generation to grow up with the internet. So online, for young people, there are opportunities to self-organise, to take each other seriously, to find your tribe, educate and to learn as well. We recognise our power to influence big polluters. So we're using that knowledge that interaction equals value online to choose who we support based on their environmental efforts or damaging behaviours. Also, it's important to remember that young people are less likely to have economic resources and voter power. So this is a way that we can exert pressure. Since COVID, we've taken our activism further online. If you look at Fridays for Future Blackouts, you can look at how we educate each other on TikTok and tweet storms, which is great, but we know that there's no time to wait for our generation to become the decision makers. Therefore, the difficult task of convincing older people that we should be listened to remains. So as such, we're forming groups like 0 Hour, Polluters Out and the UK Student Climate Network, which are all created by young people for young people to amplify their voices and maximise impact. They're together creating new climate change narratives around the world based from our climate urgent internet age perspective, which I see as resulting in a shift to focus on a whole systems approach. So intersectionality between climate change and its impacts and other social issues is at the forefront of importance to us as a movement. There's a widespread view among young activists that you cannot disconnect climate change from other aspects of life, that inequalities are amplified. So this is obvious when you look and see that climate change impacts are already being most felt by people of colour, Indigenous peoples, people in low-income countries, women. You can look at who's most affected by health problems from it, poor air quality, who has access to green spaces, and the demographics of people who live on low-lying land prone to flooding. This means that intersectionality as a focus means that we're listening to historically silenced or underrepresented voices when they speak up on climate change. You can find that on platforms like Instagram and TikTok. We recognise these groups have been disadvantaged and oppressed by the same mindsets and systems that have led to climate change in the first place. So if you look up Elsa Migitsu, who's a Harvard University student, you can find she's talking really clearly and explained that a lot better than I could. Many young activists are also calling for resources to be directed to these most affected communities. You can look, some are calling for decision-making power to be passed to Indigenous peoples to manage the environments, which traditionally theirs as well. Other young people are taking their governments to court for failing to reduce their emissions and act on climate change, for disproportionately committing to future actions rather than present day action, for failing to protect their future mental and physical health, their rights to a healthy environment and their rights to life. And some of them are winning. Germany, for example, recently revised its emission cuts targets as a result of being taken to court. So that's 5 minutes. So I'll wrap up just by saying it's clear that as a youth movement, we're using innovative methods to get our perspective across despite the barriers we face. And also that young voices are needed to better engage more young people. I think older people can help by amplifying young and marginalised voices and by taking seriously the messages of the youth, which may extend out past the perceived limits of the climate change sphere. Yeah, that's all for me. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much. Well, I've got a question straight away. What is the Futures for Friday's blackout?
It's just where you stop using platforms as a means of protest, because obviously interaction generates value for platforms. So by refusing to engage with it, you're negatively impacting them.
Blacking them out.
And Twitter storms, is that the opposite?
No, Twitter storm is where you just blast and keep putting the same thing on Twitter.
Yeah.
And I mean, I think that it would be really helpful for many groups within SECA to be able to, have some like youth training on this. So, whether this could be facilitated, that others would like to help kind of facilitate that for members of SECA that want to learn how to use TikTok, how to use Instagram, platforms that they are not engaging on through our networks. If they had the training from the youth, they would be able to amplify it a lot more.
Yeah.
So maybe this is something as a follow-up that, if you would be up for helping, that could be something great that would come out of, we've got, over these 100 groups and a lot of them are not savvy on using Instagram and TikTok. And so I think that it's really where we need your help there.
Yeah, it might be reassuring to know that we have got online communities. They just might be invisible to older groups. So,
which is why we so have to, this is what this is all about. It's like being able to bridge all these gaps between, black and white and old and young and everybody else. And so for us to be able to start using those same platforms, and I think now is really a time where, the older, movement really, really needs to integrate a lot more and know how to use, the platforms that you guys are all using. So thank you so much.